60 acres, 6 people, 0 grocery bills. For 77 years, one American family has been eating completely free. No fertilizer, no pesticides, no seed companies, no dependency. And for decades, the government didn't want anyone to know how. In 1947, a Tennessee farmer named Walter Caldwell discovered something that the entire agricultural industry had spent billions of dollars trying to bury. A farming method so self-sufficient, so completely free from the industrial food system, that it threatened the profits of some of the most powerful corporations in America. They called it dangerous. They called it unregulated. Some called it illegal. Walter called it common sense. His family never went hungry, not once. Through droughts, through recessions, through a global pandemic that emptied grocery store shelves across this country, the Caldwell farm just kept growing. And today, his granddaughter is finally ready to tell the world exactly how they did it. This is the secret they buried in 1947. And this is how one family never let it die. In 1947, while America was celebrating the end of a world war and dreaming about television sets and shiny automobiles, a quiet farmer named Walter Caldwell was doing something on his 60-acre plot in rural Tennessee that the government would have preferred he didn't. He wasn't making moonshine. He wasn't hiding stolen money. He wasn't doing anything violent or dangerous. He was growing food, but not the way anyone else was growing it. Walter Caldwell was a stubborn man, the kind of stubborn that comes not from arrogance, but from watching your father lose his farm during the Great Depression and swearing on that man's grave that it would never happen to you. He had seen neighbors beg seed companies for credit. He had watched good land go dry because good men followed bad advice from people in suits who had never once knelt down and touched real soil. So Walter did what stubborn, brilliant, quietly desperate men sometimes do. He started watching nature instead of listening to the government. He noticed that the old forest on the edge of his property, the patch nobody farmed, nobody touched, never once failed. No drought killed it. No frost wiped it out. No pest swept through and left it barren. Year after year, decade after decade, that forest fed itself, healed itself, and grew stronger without a single bag of fertilizer or a single drop of chemical spray. So Walter asked himself a question that would change his family's life for the next 8 decades. What does the forest know that I don't? He spent 3 years just observing. He kept a notebook, a worn brown-covered composition book that his granddaughter Linda still has today. And in it, he recorded everything. Which plants grew next to which, where the soil was darkest, where the rain collected naturally, where the wind broke, where the bugs gathered and where they didn't. And then, slowly, methodically, and almost entirely alone, Walter Caldwell began to rebuild his farmland in the image of that forest. He stopped tilling. At a time when every agricultural extension office in the state was preaching deep plow tillage as the gospel of modern farming, Walter put his tiller in the barn and left it there. He called it, in his own handwritten words, cutting the veins of the earth. He planted trees between his crops, fruit trees, nut trees, tall canopy trees that the government farm advisors told him would steal sunlight and ruin his yields. He planted them anyway. He kept his soil covered year-round with mulch, leaves, wood chips, anything that mimicked the forest floor. His neighbors drove past his farm and shook their heads. Some of them laughed. None of them are farming anymore. The Caldwell land, all 60 acres of it,
is still in the family, still feeding them, still producing without a single mortgage, without a single year of failed harvest since 1947. But here is where the story gets complicated, because what Walter was doing had a name, and that name, by the mid-1950s, had been quietly, carefully, and very deliberately pushed off every official farming curriculum in the United States. It was called permaculture, and the American agricultural industry had very good financial reasons for making sure nobody talked about it.
To understand why what Walter Caldwell was doing threatened powerful people, you have to understand what American farming looked like in the years after World War II. The war had done something extraordinary to the agricultural chemical industry. Factories that had been built to produce explosives and chemical weapons suddenly found themselves with massive production capacity and no war to feed. The solution they landed on was elegant in a deeply troubling way. They would sell those chemicals to farmers. Nitrogen, the core ingredient of TNT, became synthetic fertilizer. Nerve agent research became the foundation of modern pesticides. The same industrial machine that had armed a world war was repackaged, remarketed, and sold to American farmers as the future of food. And it worked. Yields went up, immediately and dramatically. Farmers who adopted the new chemical methods saw results they had never seen before. The government supported it. The banks financed it. The universities taught it. What nobody talked about, not loudly, not officially, was the cost. The cost to the soil, the cost to the water, the cost to the farmer who now needed to buy inputs every single season just to maintain what the chemicals had destroyed in the soil the season before. It was, in the bluntest possible terms, a system designed to create dependency. Buy our fertilizer, buy our pesticide, buy our herbicide, buy our seed, because the seed we've developed only works with our fertilizer. Walter Caldwell refused every single part of that system. His farm used no purchased inputs. His soil, built on the forest model, generated its own fertility through decomposition, fungal networks, and companion planting relationships that science is only now beginning to fully map. His pest pressure was controlled not by sprays, but by the diversity of his plantings, because in a diverse system, no single pest ever finds enough of its preferred food to reach population levels that cause real damage. His water needs were met almost entirely by the land itself, by swales he had dug along the contour lines of his property that caught rainfall and let it sink slowly into the ground rather than running off. His neighbors' fields would flood after heavy rain. Walter's land would drink. And his seed, this is the part that made certain people genuinely angry, his seed cost him nothing, because Walter saved it. Every year, from every crop, he selected the strongest plants, let them go to seed, dried that seed, and stored it for the following spring. When seed companies came to his county in the late 1950s, pushing their new hybrid varieties that produced well for one season, but whose seeds were sterile or unstable, meaning farmers had to buy new seed every year, Walter sent them away. He sent them away politely. He was that kind of man. But he sent them away. His granddaughter Linda recalls hearing stories about the afternoon a company representative arrived at the farm in a very clean truck and a very expensive hat. and told Walter that his old seed varieties were illegal to sell commercially, a new regulation that had quietly passed through the state legislature with very little public debate. Walter looked at that man for a long moment. Then he said, and Linda says these were his exact words, "I ain't selling them, son. I'm eating them." The man left. Walter went back to work, and the Caldwell farm kept producing.
Walter Caldwell died in 1983 at the age of 79, still working his land. His son, Robert, had grown up inside the system his father built, not as a student studying it, but as a child living it, which is an entirely different kind of education. Robert didn't know the academic words for what his father had created. He didn't know the term food forest, or polyculture, or mycorrhizal network. He just knew that when he pressed his hand into the soil on his father's farm, it smelled alive in a way that other people's soil didn't. He knew that the land fed them. Completely. Reliably. Year after year. Robert expanded what his father had built. He added a pond, positioned, just as his father had positioned everything, by watching where the water naturally wanted to go. The pond became a food source in itself. Fish, watercress, ducks that fertilized the surrounding garden beds with every step they took. He added a small orchard section his father hadn't gotten to, persimmons and pawpaws, native fruit trees that required almost no care once established and produced abundantly every fall. And he kept the seed-saving practice with a devotion that bordered on religious. The Caldwell seed collection by the time Robert passed it to his own daughter Linda contained over 200 varieties: tomatoes, beans, squash, corn, peppers, herbs, some of them varieties that no longer existed anywhere else in the world. Varieties that had been bred by farmers over generations for flavor, for resilience, for the specific conditions of Middle Tennessee, and that the commercial seed industry had simply let disappear because they couldn't be patented. Linda Caldwell is 51 years old today. She is the third generation to steward this land, and she is the one who finally decided the secret was too important to keep. "My grandfather hid it because he was afraid they'd find a way to stop him," she told me when I visited the farm last spring. "My father kept quiet because he just didn't think anyone would believe him. But I look at what's happening, at food prices, at supply chains breaking down, at families who can't afford to eat, and I think keeping this to ourselves is almost selfish." We were standing in the oldest section of the food forest when she said this, the section Walter himself had planted in the late 1940s. The trees were massive now. The canopy closed overhead and the air underneath was noticeably cooler, noticeably moister than the open field 50 yards away. The ground was carpeted in plants, some edible, some medicinal, some there purely to fix nitrogen or attract beneficial insects, all of them playing a role in a system that had been running, largely without human intervention, for over 70 years. Linda reached down and pulled up a handful of the soil. It was black, dense, alive with earthworm activity. It smelled like rain and moss and something older and deeper that I couldn't name. "You can't buy this," she said. "You can't spray this into existence. You can't manufacture it. It took 70 years to build this soil, and it would take 70 more to rebuild it if we destroyed it." She let it fall back to the ground. "That's why they don't teach it. Because you can't sell it. You can only build it. And once it's built, you don't need them anymore." That last sentence hung in the Tennessee air for a long moment. Once it's built, you don't need them anymore. So what exactly did Walter Caldwell build? What is this system that fed a family for nearly 80 years without a single purchased bag of fertilizer, without a single year of crop failure, and without a single acre of soil that didn't improve with every passing season? Let's break it down. Because this isn't magic. It isn't conspiracy. It is, at its core, embarrassingly logical once someone points it out. First, no tillage. Walter never broke his soil open after his initial setup. Why? Because soil is not dirt. Soil is a living ecosystem, a web of fungi, bacteria, earthworms, and microorganisms so complex that a single tablespoon of healthy farmland contains more living organisms than there are human beings on Earth. When you till, when you run a plow or a rototiller through that ecosystem, you shatter it. You destroy the fungal networks that move nutrients and water between plants. You expose carbon that has been stored underground to the air, where it oxidizes and disappears. You create a temporary flush of fertility followed by long-term decline. Tilling, in Walter's view, was borrowing against a loan you could never repay. Second, permanent ground cover. Walter's soil was never bare. Not in winter. Not between plantings. Never. He used cover crops, mulch, fallen leaves, wood chips, anything that mimicked the leaf litter of a natural forest floor. This covering protected the soil from rain compaction, kept moisture from evaporating, fed the soil organisms through decomposition, and suppressed weeds so effectively that Walter's labor needs dropped dramatically after the first few years of establishment. Third, diversity above everything. Walter never grew monocultures. Not a field of just corn. Not a row of just tomatoes. Everything on his farm grew in community, the way plants grow in nature. Tall plants sheltered shorter ones. Deep-rooted plants broke up compaction and brought up minerals for shallow-rooted neighbors. Nitrogen-fixing plants fed heavy feeders. Flowering plants attracted the insects that controlled pests. The farm was not a factory. It was an ecosystem. And ecosystems, unlike factories, do not collapse when one component fails. Fourth, closed-loop fertility. Nothing left the Caldwell farm as waste.